CUHK, closing off with Martini, and closing off UN35. I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to start this debate.
When a child of 12 and 13 is prohibited from coming out from a social environment and by his parents, when a child of 12 and 13 cannot opt out of certain religious practices which they deem to be repellent, we believe that this is a concrete harm the government has an imperative to deal with today. We believe that our end goal is very simple. We want the best actualization of children's self-actualization as well as their welfare, but what we realize is that the actualization is in the long term. It's extraordinarily dependent on the childhood period, especially from the ages of 12 to 18, which is formal to the identity formation which will have long-term lasting effects. So today our models have three major characteristics. First of all, this is a non-permanent arrangement. By the same child's consent that goes to this government institution, they can choose to return back to their own home if they so choose. Second of all, we have a definition of these children will be under 18, but we think that they will generally be above the age of 10, where they will generally be able to express informed consent as well as have liability for various things, for example in law. And that's also a point where the puberty starts and where a lot of matters we're going to address is coming out. We believe that if our policy is passed, that will be the majority of the cases anyway. And thirdly, we believe that we are talking about a secular government who's in charge of this. We are talking about generally government with generally well-established means, right? And we're talking about generally first world countries. We do not believe that this is fundamental to contextualize it to a specific state, and that's why we believe that generally speaking, this is more a matter of principle debate and also about how best to make sure that child's rights are actualized. Today, our proposition has three major burdens to prove to you. First of all, when is it right that the parents' rights to govern their children can be overridden and where the line should be drawn? And second of all, why is it that when this line is drawn and parents' rights are kind of impeded or overridden, why is it that children's choice will be an accurate one to overtake that choice? And thirdly, why is it that state is a desirable substitute in terms of parents, in terms of caretaking? I'll also address other minor issues. So first of all, when is it okay to override parents' rights? Right? As stipulated by the motion, this is above and beyond the current legal standard of abuse in terms of both psychological and mental. Right? We think that's okay, but we think that the line should be drawn even further. Right? In a sense, that's saying that there are some things which are not legally under the definition of abuse. They can also have negative impacts in terms of self-actualization. I've already given two major examples in my opening, which is first of all, is religious practices which are perhaps engaged by an entire family, which are very hard to opt out. And second of all, a general repressive environment in terms of the family, which makes it impossible for these children to come out, right? So basically, why is it that it's okay to override parents' rights? We believe that the fundamental definition is based on the harm principle in terms of what when the parents present an active harm to the child's self-actualization, and why that's okay to take away from it, right? Okay, so let's contextualize this further, especially in terms of 12 to 18, the formative age, right? So let's look at a few of the special significances which occur uniquely to this age gap, this age bracket, right? First of all, we say that the identity formation period in this has incredibly long-lasting effects, which in the later parts of life cannot be often revoked, right? First of all, if we're talking about in terms of religion, all of religious rights, for example, in terms of confirmation into this religion, or for example, some even more indelible and permanent rituals, such as female circumcision, for instance, right, can be taken within this period and perhaps even early in childhood, right? And we think that these things are permanent and have an indelible effect in terms of the long term. And second of all, we are talking about the lack of an opt-out mechanism. Even if your parents continue to extend an influence towards you when you grow up, they still keep in contact, obviously. But we say that when you're living apart and you have independent financial means, it's easier for you to opt out in that late stage. But what we have right now is an overlap in terms of the child not having the ability to opt out, not having the ability to find the best ways to self-actualize, and also without overlapping with parents.
As stated in the motion, if there is proven to be harm to the children, there is already existing mechanism, then please engage the
definition of abuse is too weak. We think for the things that it respects are too fundamental, but not enough. For instance, in the current legal status quo, right, not letting your child come out is not counted as abuse, right? We challenge the opportunity to give us a legal definition of abuse, which will cover that, right? If they're talking about that, then they're talking about changing the legal definition of abuse, which is not what their burden is anyway, right? So moving on to other things, except for the religious and sexual orientation points I talked about, parents sometimes also offer very intrusive methods in terms of, for example, career building and what kind of interests that I want to develop. In the sense that the government will not let you take certain subjects, not let you explore certain areas of interest, right? We see that parents are also very selfish actors in the sense that they often want to imprint themselves on the next generation, and we believe that this kind of imprint is not directly within the rights of the parents, right? The rights of the parents only exist insofar as the right is exercised to the benefit of the child, right? If the parents' right is exercised with the spirit of merely imprinting yourself into a future generation, we do not believe that same calculus will stand, and we believe if that is the intent, that intent is illegitimate, and when that is proved to be causing harm, we believe that harm should be rectified. No, thank you. I'll also move on to why children's choice will also be a viable and accurate way which to override parents' right in this instance. Right? First of all, we say that a child is not incapable of informed consent. We say that, for example, in the law, we have liability attaching to children as young as the age of 10, right? We say that when they are able to take legal responsibility in all senses of the word for the actions they do, first of all, they are old enough to understand the concept of consequences, right? So that the choice they make will have some consequences. Second of all, they also have, for example, when we talk about religion, when we talk about sexual orientation, right? These things are more of an inborn quality. So when they are at the age of 10, they may have already reached a state where they already realize this thing, which is inherent in their genes, for instance. And we also talked about where they can form an autonomous opinion, especially when they are in the ages of 14 and 15 and in middle school. And we think that any attempt to say, oh, they can't think for themselves will be futile because we're limiting to the age of puberty, okay? Characteristics inherent to puberty. And finally, why the state will be a desirable substitute. We do not believe that the state should be intrusive. As opposed to the intrusive means of the parents, the state should be more of a laissez-faire attitude. Basically providing the basic daily necessities for them to be enough to get education, to get medical care, and so on, right? We believe that the state is good because it can provide medical care or psychological care, psychologists, if you will. And we also believe that the state that we're talking about in today's context already has the facility to do so, right? So the state's role is not to actively impose anything, but rather to stay out of the picture and give free rein for the child to self-actualize in the best way they can. And that's why today's motion must stand. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for his speech. I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition, please. Would you please? What the Prime Minister has done is to unfairly narrow down today's motion and to just include one possibility, and that is that when they characterize the entire motion as being that these parents would actually impose their religious or cultural beliefs on the children, therefore it will harm their self-actualization. But we say that children actually have multiple reasons to want to leave the parents' home and to opt for state care, even without physical or psychological abuse. So we think they are actually trying to narrow down the possibility and actually not to include and engage with other paradigms. Now, before I move on to my own substantial arguments, let me first rebut on some of the points given by them. Now, the Prime Minister has told us that, well, if this policy fails, then there is a viable alternative. They can simply return to their parents' home. But we say that this policy is actually creating and entrenching irrevocable and long-term harm that cannot be reversed simply by returning to the parents' home. We think it has already passed a point of no return and there is no way back. Why is that so? Because we think when these children actually opted to stay out of their parents' house, and I actually opted for state care, then this experience will actually traumatize the parents so hard that they actually lose the ability and lose faith in their parenting as a whole, and also they actually lose their bonding and emotional bond with their children, because these emotional bonds have to be established for over a very long period of time, and suddenly these children, even without any evidence of physical or psychological abuse, they are actually trying to opt out of their parents' care. So we think this experience is so traumatizing and it has damaged the parent-child relationship to a very severe level that there is simply no opt-out mechanism from this policy. No. And then they brought up a concept of how this parents' right, how children's rights have to be guaranteed by this motion, because sometimes there will be religious imposition or cultural imposition. But we say, firstly, that there is already current mechanism to deal with this policy. Firstly, when these parents are trying to impose or entrench their religious beliefs onto these children, as they are parents' rights, we are actually talking about first world nations with a secular state and with civil rights protections. These states can actually already have existing mechanisms like civil rights mechanisms to prevent these parents from imposing and indoctrinating their religious beliefs onto them. And we think that if that religious belief is entrenched, is imposed to a very severe extent, that it will cause psychological harm, then this policy is no longer needed, because they will already be possible to actually leave their parents' home. No. And we also think that the best way to achieve self-actualization is to actually expose them to different narratives, because what they're trying to say and actually teach the children is that, well, if you don't agree with what your parents say, then simply opt out of that mechanism. Simply shut your doors, shut your ears to these kind of narratives, and actually stay in your comfort zone. We think it is a very dangerous narrative and notion, because firstly, it opposes the very principle of diversity, and it doesn't teach them anything. It teaches them not to regard people's argument and to engage them and to appreciate the flaws and benefits of different arguments, to compare them, but also it will render them as harmful citizens of the civil society, because in a civil society, for them to work, we need citizens to actually actively engage with different notions. They have to tolerate and celebrate difference, as well as trying to engage with the other side's paradigm. What they're trying to do will have a long-term and severe impact on the civil society as a whole, that we think not only that self-actualization of children cannot be protected, but civil rights of the whole society will be damaged. And then lastly, no, they've come up with a notion that state is actually a desirable alternative, and what they have tried to prove is that, well, they are psychologists, but what they have proven up to this point is that they have shown that the state has the ability to do so. They haven't told us why the state has the right to do so, which is about what I will try to talk about right now. Yes?
Parents says at a dinner table every night, being gay is a sin. Does your current status quo laws count as abuse?
How is, when parents actually tell the children that homosexuality is actually a sin repeatedly, and this will certainly cause a psychological abuse, then how is that not qualifying for the existing mechanism that they can already opt out from the parents' care? Now, we believe that the state actually has no role here, because we think that, first of all, we think that the state has no right to actually involve itself in the private sphere of citizens, because we have to recognize that the state powers has its boundaries. The state should only concern itself with public sphere, with public policies, with, for example, the distribution of wealth, for example, the upholding of the law to actually protect the social contract, and these are actually the state's responsibility. But when it comes to the children's right and the affair of the family, within that family, we think it is entirely not within the prerogative and right of the state to intervene. And second of all, we want to argue that not only does the state has no right to actually step in, but the state also has no responsibility to step in, because we think that already the state has already provided a lot of legal and social support and protection for these children, but also we think if they actually choose to step in, then it will lead to criticisms from other people that, well, the state is actually misallocating the resources to actually favor and prioritize one group over another, and they're simply misusing the taxpayers' money. Now, my second contribution into this debate is how this motion, how the children is actually not the right agent and not the correct actor to decide. Because we think that, first of all, we all know the children are under 18, they are not mature enough to actually make these long-term calculations, because when they have actually chosen to opt out from their parents' home, then it is actually a long-term decision. As I've told you, there is no way return. No. And we also say that because children are very prone to rebellion and actually antisocial behavior at that stage, then we think that the children are actually not in the best position to make these choices, because very often they will be dictated by emotions and their antisocial behavior. That's why they will make the wrong choices. And also we think the children will actually prioritize short-term happiness over long-term planning because they have not grown up themselves. They have not experienced the same process as the parents. So their perspective is not as long-term as the parents. Therefore, we think the children are not the best actor here. Now, my third argument today is how it will negatively shift the parent-child relationship, because we think that even if these children have not opted for this policy, the parents would already, in their rational calculus, will enter their calculation that because they don't want to lose their child, therefore they will actually accommodate all the unreasonable demands coming from the children because they don't want to lose their child, and therefore they will be unable to actually take a tough approach in the education of the child, and which is sometimes necessary to actually teach them some hardcore principles. Now, my fourth argument in today's debate is how this will unfairly stigmatize the parent, because what we have told you today is that if you actually propose this motion, then the parents, without actually imposing any kind of physical or psychological harm, they have to go through the process of being judged by others and by the society, because everybody would now think that, oh, these are all bad parents, because nobody would actually go to such things to investigate whether or not you have actually caused any harm to these children. They would simply think and label you, oh, you are all bad parents, therefore they would actually discriminate against them. So we think that because we want to protect children's right here, we want to achieve self-actualization for the children as well as the protection for parents, we're very proud to oppose.
And the opposition now invited the Prime Minister.
Choy, we want to establish the problem that there are actually a lot of very intrusive parents in the status quo. How they actually prohibit the children from self-actualizing in terms of identity formation, especially in the sector of religious identity and also gender identity, which we believe that is very crucial especially in the puberty age. We say that, for example, in search of the real gender identity, we say that even if the government today is trying to say that it's not up to a point of psychological abuse, we say that because this integral values of religious values or bias against homosexuality are actually actually being held dearly to parents, are also fundamental beliefs of the parents. We say that these parents actually cannot help to perpetuate these integral values to their children, and we say that the government is not trying to have a fault-finding approach, but it's actually recognizing that this inherent incompatibility of the children and the parents, if they actually have this, if these values are actually held very dearly by the parents, and we see that children actually being deprived of a more autonomous or neutral environment to walk through the state of confusion about their gender identity and religious identity. We say that identity formation is not an absolute choice at one point of time. It's actually throughout the whole puberty stage, from your 12-year-olds or maybe to your early 20s. It's a process of self-confrontation or interaction with the society. And we say that allowing the parents to actually have a very frequent influence to perpetuate their values, even not in abusive manners, but because how this biological attachment between children and parents, making it hard to actually to voice out their the children's real values, because they feel like it's actually wrong to go against their parents. We see that this undue influence of the parents, this pressure being imposed, is actually not unjustified, and that's why we say that it's time for the state to take over. And on the second point is that we say that eventually the side of opposition actually will encourage a more healthy parental relationship in such a context when actually parents and children are sharing incompatible values, because we actually avoid the direct confrontation, especially in the puberty stage, especially in puberty age. So a few quick rebuttals against the government. So they say that it's actually really harmful because children cannot opt out. Just one clarification to emphasize that we are saying that our model is actually reversible. upon children's consent, you can always opt out from the theme. However, their argument is saying that it's so detrimental to the parent-child relationship that they will not go back forever. So what we respond to that is that we say that there is actually early childhood attachment between the children and the parents, and also some biological attachment. We say that it's actually a possibility to allow reconciliation. And on a second layer, even if after they go to the state's protection, they say that, okay, so I eventually decide that I'm just not okay with my parents. We think that it's still okay for them to forever opt out from this parental and child relationship. We say that the government need to prove why is it problematic for them to opt out forever from this parent and child relationship. Also, a quick rebuttal against the stigmatization point. We say that we're not on a fault-finding approach, as I've emphasized just in my earlier speech. We say that especially it's a private decision for children to opt out from the family, go to the state, and it's not under public scrutiny, not someone to broadcast a decision. We really don't understand why there's a point of stigmatization. So we say that in such an occasion, while children and parents are actually on an unequal level playing field, the state should not be allowed to neglect the situation and to reinforce this absolutism of parents' right to, in terms of influencing the children's identity formation. We say that the state is not in a position to side with the children or to side with the parents. We say that it should be actually the best actor, to be a neutral actor, to allow the children of this autonomous environment to have this self-discovery process, to find on the way what is their true identity. And we say that especially because, okay, thank you.
Do you recognize that there are other possible reasons that these children want to leave, want to opt out? For example, like their parents cannot satisfy their financial needs or because of their antisocial behavior. And do you think these children to be able to choose that?
We say that if the children really hold this antisocial mentality to be so fundamental to their identity formation, like for example, how their parents are always pushing them to go to meet new friends or go to extracurricular activities that is actually so fundamental to them, we say that they can always choose this option to be taken care of by the state. So I'll go on to the second layer about how we believe that eventually parental relationship will be improved as a whole. We say that because now it's actually on two layers. First of all, we avoid the detriment of direct confrontation between the children and the parents in some very fundamental identity debate between them. And we say that because both actually hold the values very dearly to them, that's why we say that the relationship will necessarily break down after all this trauma of direct confrontation. And also we say that after this policy, it's actually a strong messaging effect to the parents that parents should realize that they cannot have the absolute right to impose their values on the children. It's actually about this information towards the parents, how they actually realize that now they do not have this absolute right, and how we actually avoid this direct confrontation between the children and the parents. It's actually on both sides. It's actually making it's like in the state school they're actually on the two extremes. We're actually now pushing them to more middle and making their values actually more compatible with each other. And this is what we say, that there will be a true platform for real attachment and for healthy parental relationship, which children will not be the subordinate or the slave of the parents' will, but they actually can be on a level playing field for real attachment. So what I told you today is that we say that the problem the status quo is that the parenting method we observe today is overly intrusive, and how it's actually affecting the identity formation of the children, and how state, because of its secular nature, and how it's actually have the ability to provide a more autonomous environment for children especially in the puberty age, to discover what they truly want. And also because we believe that parental relationship eventually will be more healthy, we're proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister. Now I'd like to invite Deputy Leader of Opposition, please.
final point that the opposition side made today is because these parents will harm them to find their identity crisis, and that's why the state is somehow better agent to let them find it. But they haven't proven to us, they haven't given us any justification on that. While and also we believe that religious identity and gender identity do not only limit it to when you are puberty. It's not only exhaustive for the search process. While on this stage, for example, one of my friend here, he might have some girlfriends before, but now he's in love with me. So this proves that we ought to have these changes, and we do not believe that it's so essential that this justification can provide the champion of children's right over anything like parents' right, etc., etc. So several arguments today from our point, which firstly is on the characterization of children, second is on parent-children relationship, and finally on some social level impact. But firstly, a few rebuttals, right? They mentioned that the religious identity and gender identity point, firstly, I just mentioned that it's not exhaustive search for that specific age, and secondly, unless they can prove to us, put them on the stage can better help them to find them. But we believe that even if the parents is saying something against your own personal belief, it still triggers you to think more than the state, because right now the state, when you put them into orphanage, they will give no guidance to you towards that, which we believe ultimately slows down the process for you to search for whatever identity, religious, gender-wise. And finally, they commit a mistake. They're making this judgment, saying that somehow stigmatized gay parents would tend to raise gay children or try to impose their own gender identity towards their children, which we believe ultimately is not true. And we believe if that's so significant that causes harm, the law is there to protect it. Secondly, they also mentioned that under our paradigm, we break down the relationship worse than their paradigm. We are very confused. Well, under their paradigm, they immediately cut off the children-parents relationship, not to mention breakdown because it's now absent. But under our paradigm, we believe that there are still some kind of social welfare department, etc., etc., to help you when you can find them to talk, to negotiate. At least there's a possibility to change. Under their paradigm, irreversible harm is being conducted, is being created. To my arguments, firstly is on the children's side, and why is it not a rational choice for them? They have already conceded from Victor's, my partner's POI, that when these children can simply let their family because of financial needs, or even if they are antisocial, which their parents deemed it not correct or not healthy for their development in a very long term. Under these two examples, these proves that the government side is A, they are discriminating poor people, which we believe if they are that poor to satisfy the basic human needs of these children, the state welfare will complete. And two, if these parents cannot satisfy the needs which they want to buy expensive toys, etc., etc., we believe that government is not responsible to cater every children's responsibility, and that's why they fundamentally committed an error. And finally, onto the end, children is found to be antisocial. I believe it's very good for parents at least try to give them some exposure to the social ground, to let them at least try to recover or help them. So it's for something good, and that's why under the paradigm we see that these children might be less long-term, might be less mature towards their own growth in that sense. And my partner has mentioned to you that this choice is not rational. It's because not only these children, they lack a concept of cause in their mental calculation, because starting from birth, they only receive things, but they don't contribute anything to get these things. So we believe that they lack the concept of cause in this mental calculation, which cannot enable them to make a rational choice on whether I should leave or not, and also because they lack the society exposure and the experience to enable them to make certain kind of things, whether my parents is really treating me that bad that I have to leave to let the state, which it somehow cannot offer much for me, that's better for my growth and me ultimately. So we believe for the children's protection, it's not fair to stand on that side. On the second point, it's about parent and children relationship, which my partner has told you that not only the people directly, parents, children will be harmed. Other sisters, brothers, and family members might not be harmed because right now they haven't contributed to such an accident. But if you legalize it, it immediately immediately expand this harm to these people, because right now they are more easily to suffer such kind of tangible harm, and they haven't justified under our side. We believe that parents do have certain rights to guide the children, because right now they are the only contributor, and the children do not necessarily have such a right to be not to be like guided by their parents. And under the law, if any tangible harm is being imposed by their parents towards the children, we have been well protected by the law, and we believe it's okay for the parents to impose values and impose the values they believe that children should take. They believe they are correct to the children, because right now parents may tell you, under their paradigm, parents may tell you going out at late night is wrong, and under their paradigm, these children can literally and legitimately leave home because they don't believe that's true. They believe that's not contributive to finding their identity, and that's why it's very fundamentally error, because government is now empowering these children and putting these children's personal preferences over lifestyle higher than the rights of parents, and under their paradigm, they are subordinating these parents to cater whatever wants that these children need, which we see is very problematic under their scenario, because they don't set any benchmark. As long as the children want, within age 12 to 18, they can leave. To a final point on social level impact, which we believe that under our side, we always emphasize that family value is to be safeguarded, because it's fundamental building block, and it's the only possibility that unidirectional devotion is being shown in the society. Well, under the model proposed by the government side, it further entrenches the generation misunderstanding between parents and children, because right now they don't understand, they can simply leave it, no need to solve, no need to communicate, and that's what the government is sending active message of different people. And the state should not take the responsibility in the very first place, because no tangible harm to children. Now, the state should own not any responsibility to anyone on their subjective life attitude, especially for these children who might be too naive to make their decision on that. We should not cater to all children's different preferences of life and then immediately put them back to the state for our protection and taking care of it. It's an unfair burden to put on our government, and that's why we believe it's not economically feasible as well. Under their best case scenario, there might be only rational kids leaving, but we are not sure that how they will be better finding their identity under the state. But under our worst case scenario, much longer time might be needed. At least there is a possibility of safeguarding family and helping these children to find themselves.
Invite a member of government, please.
Mr. Speaker, 3 points of great rebuttals. They tell us that it is good to expose children to all the narratives, but what we say is that under the status quo, parents is the only narratives that the children are exposed to. What we see under the status quo, the exact social problem is that parents having overwhelming control over the children and over the identity construction of those children. And this is not good to their self-actualization, which I'll further talk about this in my extensions. And second, they talk about this mechanism of social workers somehow be able to mediate all of the harms. But we say that, as I'm going to point out in my extension, harm itself is inherently a subjective thing that cannot be determined by any third-party actors. And secondly, they haven't told us that why this mechanism of seeking social workers doesn't equally upset the parents, right? We think that by saying this, they concede that yes, there are frequent conflicts. There are conflicts or irreconcilable differences happening between the parents and the children, and they also consider that children actually need a way out. But what they didn't tell you is that they didn't tell you what is the mechanism to mechanism for the children to have to weigh out and to what extent parents enjoy the right over the children, right? And they also have this absurd argument about how somehow some form of financial contribution from the parents somehow justify their right of possession over their children or the right to construct their children's identity. And we see that that is completely problematic, especially when they didn't draw the line as to what kind of right that the parents enjoy. Okay. So two unique extensions brought to you by the opposing government. We talked to you first about how harm itself is an inherently subjective thing, and then secondly, how we think that this model can actually achieve the best outcome for the whole society. First, about how harm is inherently a subjective thing. Yes.
Why do you think that?
Yes, open.
Yes. How is not a subjective thing? Because when these children actually report physical and psychological abuse, they can actually take it to the court and actually let it be judged by a very independent-minded and critical thinking judge. And
yeah, thank you. Exactly. That's what the case I want to bring up. Good, thank you. Okay, so when we talk about, what we say is that, well, under the status quo, parents, children are entitled to leave their parents when they're entitled to physical or psychological abuse by their parents, right? What we see is that, first of all, this means that the right of parenting is inherently not an absolute right, and then abuse is inherently a subjective thing, because the rationale of this of enabling the children to leave their parents when there is physical or psychological abuse is that it's because the society recognizes that the environment is no longer conducive to the realization of their own self-identity or to their personal growth. And we see that how in the process of that judgment or of the court processing the case, the court actually gives enormous weighting to the children's opinion, right? And what we see is that under the status quo, the society already recognizes that children have their own will as to is the most proper actor as to determine what kind of harm that they have to endure, what kind of identity is best for them, right? And we see that when it comes to identity construction, the importance of values the values of things. Of the values of various different identities or things is only known to them, right? So we say that who is the judge to say that parents' care is more important than realizing their homosexual identities, right? The children are suffering inside because they want to leave their teenagers are suffering inside because they want to leave their homosexual identity, right? And we say that we don't see why judge is the only legitimate actor in determining in saying that the value of parental care is more important to their homosexual identity. And we say that age doesn't actually matter. They keep telling us that how children are actually irrational actors. But we say that when it comes to identity construction, every piece of identity is inherently a subjective thing. And the children, when they voice out such desire at such a young age, maybe this actually is their deepest desire after all, right? So we say there is no problem to that. Okay, so to my second unique point of extension, that is whether that is the best outcome of the society, right? We say that our society should prioritize human capital over other things, including the personal health, mental health, self-actualization, and we say that the best way to give effect to that form of self-actualization or the best outcome comes from two elements. First, free choice, and two, rational assessment of what things mean to them from the individuals. Why do we say that our model can actually achieve these two problems when it comes to a utilitarian perspective to both the actors, children and parents, right? So we first talk about the children, how it is best for the self-actualization of the children. What we see under status quo, the social problem that concerns children is essentially can be divided into two categories. First is that we see how the good kids or the kids who don't have who have huge opinions over their parents' opinions. What they essentially face is that they don't feel that they have this sense of empowerment as to whether they can determine their identity. They feel that they're in debt to their parents because their parents gave birth to them, they feed them, right? And they think and that's why they concede to them, or they didn't actually rationally assess what things mean to them when parents arbitrarily push things towards them, right? And we see that is problematic. And the second sort of problem when it comes to bad kids is that when the backies, when they think that there is, when the so-called backies find that there is irreconcilable difference with their parents, when they cannot externalize their hatred towards their parents, there is every incentive for them to internalize their hatred inside the parents, inside the matrimony, in the home themselves, right? So we see that that is problematic. So we see that for the children, why this problem actually means something to them, because this represents a choice. For children who opt to live, they will rationally assess what things actually mean to them, right? Whether they actually think love is better, or their gender identity, or other form, or freedom is better, right? And for children who opt to stay, they rationally assess that the parents' environment is most conducive to their growth, and they will actively speak out when certain things are being arbitrarily pushed to them, because they recognize that this is a matter of choice. They choose to stay in the environment, and they have nobody else to blame. And for the parents, we think that it is entirely legitimate for them to prioritize other things over the children, and if they choose to do so, it is best if they choose to prioritize short-term things like money over children. We think that okay. But if they choose to, and this model actually gives an incentive to give care and communicate with parents, and this actually prompts them to further think about whether short-term benefits is better to them or their children, their relationship. We proudly propose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank member of government. I'd like to invite the member of opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we believe that family is a very important unit for the development of the children for long term, we don't think by simply abolishing this unit or this relationship is a contributive act to the development of the children. This is why we strongly against this motion. What we are trying to do is that we aim to improve this relationship and try to facilitate this relationship in a better way. We are, as closing opposition, we consider there's no perfect identity or even lifestyle. But the problem is, we think parents have more experience to determine which way is a better life to ensure that you do not encounter those barriers which create a lot of harm to you. This is why, as there's no best and universal actualization as what a government claims, this is why we think parents have a right to ensure that their children at least have a better life. Before I move on to my substantive, I'm going to talk about two things. Firstly, why the consent proposed by Tsai government is wrong, and secondly, their contradiction in the speech. Firstly, they claim that because of the liability of the crime, and also somehow you can construct your own identity in gender or religion, it somehow indicates that you have the ability to have the consent and well-informed the consent. We think without any analysis from the Tsai government, we think this is so fancy for them to simply claim it. This is why we think by having the liability of crime, which only means that the government thinks that you are responsible to the act, doesn't mean that you consent or even have a well-informed decision-making process in your mind. This is why the assumption is wrong inside government. Secondly, they also talk about as closing government that we are also okay with children to conceive short-term benefits, for example, like money in exchange for long-term professional achievement. If this is the case, I cannot agree with you at all, because I think the professional achievement is much more important than having $20 per hour to work in the McDonald's at this moment. This is why you are extremely wrong in this case. What I'm going to talk about to you today is why we think parental right isn't something that owned by the children. This is why children should not have the right to trade it. And secondly, how by preserving, and there's a deadlock between both opposition and government that which right should be preserved, whether the children's right or the parental right. Under our analysis, I will tell you why we should preserve the parents' right. Firstly, no. To what extent a government helps you to facilitate your choice is when you are a rational actor that you can decide for yourself, that you are less susceptible to the environment, which why the government will entrust you and try to maximize your happiness. But in cases like children, we don't think they have the capacity to do so. This is why, when we see this kind of harm is overwhelming, we don't think a government should actively help you to facilitate this choice. Because the existence of the government and construction of a government is happy to prevent any further harm. For example, like organ donation or organ sale, or even smoking underage or drinking underage. This is why in this case we see all this analogy applied in this case. This is why government shouldn't allow you and help you to facilitate this kind of choices. And secondly, why we think children do not own the parental right. This is why government shouldn't have them do so. Firstly, we understand and we can see very clearly that the parental right is granted by the government to the parents before the child turns adult. This is why, because the government entrusts a special relationship between the son and the father, which the state thinks that based on this special relationship, the parents will always do good to the children. This is why the government is going to entrust them. But we also see the exception. For example, when you have psychological and physical assault to the children, this is why the government will no longer provide you and grant you this right. But the case in this debate, if you look into the motion clearly, is about whether the children can have the right to choose whether I transfer the parental right to another entity. So this is not whether the government's right can take away your parental right or to determine the right of the children. This is what the entire government bench is wrong at the very beginning, that the assumption is wrong. This is why we don't think the principle stands. Yes. Yes.
Why does the children cannot? Why can't the children choose which entity to help them? If you think that that's the problem, that is the problem.
Because the problem is, in between the comparison between the parental right and children's right, we always need to base on the determination that which right can maximize the ultimate happiness of that individual. This is how to my second argument, that allowing the parental rights to continue to stay in the parent's hand is going to maximize the parent, also the kids, and also the parent-children relationship in the long term. Side opening government claim that we do not want confrontation. Confrontation seems like war and gun, the children will shoot at each other. This is why this confrontation is unfavorable. But in the normal and general of what they want to say, general cases, children and parents would argue, or even in a very intense, that they never have such kind of action blocks what government proposed. But why this kind of negotiation is very necessary? Because if we pass the policy proposed by side government, you are going to provide an easy way out for children to not negotiate with their parents and try to directly go out to another entity and rely on this entity. Why is it problematic? If the assumption is family unit is an important unit for the development of the children's growth, we don't think that simply abolishing this relationship is a good one. Because firstly, we think negotiation is a reasonable way to persuade your parents' mind, and in order to improve and sustain this relationship. Because, as what side government also proposed, that we want the children to ultimately return to the home because we allow them to have a second chance to have a reversible situation. But if you do not allow this negotiation to happen at the very beginning, it's going to be a zero-sum game that either the parents would hurt and fatherly want the children to be back, but the ideology still hasn't changed and the relationship still jeopardized. This is why we think negotiation is very important to have a sustainable and long-term relationship between the parents and children with the assumption that family is a very important unit for the growth of the children. Secondly, side government never mentioned that who is going to take care of these children. Assumption is the orphan. But let's talk about how orphan and parents comparison, parents always better. Because parents have an inherent incentive to maximize the happiness of the children. Because, firstly, in these kind of cases, when you're surrounded by children which have no person can take care of every one of them, the case is very likely to have things like bullying and different kind of wrong ideology introduced to these children. But secondly, it's how we don't think the cost fee hired by the government would have a higher incentive to make sure the happiness of the children. Because of all this comparison, this is why, in order to maximize the happiness of the children, you should always preserve the parental right rather than children's right.
I'd like to thank a member of opposition. I invite the last speech from
Ladies and gentlemen, two pledges for today's debate. First thing concerns the kids, of course. The second thing concerns the benefits to the parents as well as the community, which we believe the upper house of the debate actually failed to draw attention to. But anyway, there will be several ideas of rebuttals to the opposition bench before I move into the clashes. Firstly, we heard the idea of how this policy is irreversible in the sense that it cannot bring trauma to parents once their kids choose to leave. But our answer is this. What we want to promote into this policy is not only about the identity of the kids, it's also about the responsibility of the parents and the kids. We want to promote a rational assessment of one's own conduct, which also means the idea of how you should bear your own consequences for the decisions that you make. So we are absolutely fine with parents suffering from a trauma if it is their own maltreatment to the kids at first that actually lead to kids leaving away. This is a very strong incentive, in fact, to actually drive the parents to look for better ways to actually handle the parent-child relationship. And this is extremely conducive to both the parents and the child as a whole. And we also hear from we hear the idea of how this is an easy way out for children to not to negotiate with their parents and to just simply leave. We do not say this is a truth because we have to recognize that even for children, the option to actually opt out and leave the family is the last resort that he is actually relying on. No, thank you, sir. Which also means that unusual cases, children and parents are actually, at least the children themselves, are actually very willing to negotiate with parents and to solve their problems. What happens today in the status quo, as continuously portrayed by the government, is the idea of how parents tend to ignore what the children usually want. Which also means that if children are confined in the family without the alternative option, it gives a stronger incentive for parents to actually continue their own way of treating the children in a bad manner. So that the children, because they cannot have an effective solution to the problem, they simply cannot have anything to rely on. No, thank you, sir. So we see today's policy is actually a very good option to actually incentivize both the parents and the kids to actually actively look for reconciliation, to actually solve any conflicts within the parent and child relationship. No, thank you, sir. So we also they also talk about how the parents will start to try to accommodate whatever needs that the kids want to. We don't think it's true, because what we are encouraging under this policy is not some kind of appeasement by either the parents or kids. What happens under this policy is the effectiveness of policy lies in the potential of the kids living home, which also means this is a threat that the parents may have to face if in the event that they are actually dealing with the kids in a bad manner. Which also means that this continuous existence of this threats of kids leaving home actually gives a very strong drive for both the parents and kids to go for rational discussion. It's not about appeasing any party, but it's about how parents and kids compromise to actually look for something that they can both work out to their benefits. Yes, closing.
Shut down the chance to have negotiation at all, because when the parents come home, the children is left already.
No, as I said, if the children are very happy at home, why would he choose to live on a random basis? What happens is the problem exists, so the parent, and what happens is this policy to actually leave the home is basically the last resort that the children can have nothing else to rely on. You don't see how the children actually have a strong incentive to leave home randomly at the first place. No, onto my first clash quickly about the kids. We have constantly told you about how this actually gives a healthy environment for the kids to actually look for, not only about the identity, but it's also about the entire growth, entire life of the kids throughout the first 18 years at least, if you want to be precise in the numerical sense. What happens is they are talking about how the exposure and diversity is important, right? That's the precise reason why we need this policy. Because what happens in the status quo is, if you are confined to a family, you're only exposed to one single narrative. What happens under this policy is, if we give this taking care of the kids, this kind of responsibility to the state will actually allow the freedom, allow the capacity for the kids to actually look for different narratives, to explore the entire environment, the entire surrounding community on their own. Which also means this will actually give rise to the idea of greater diversity and different narratives in the existence of children's life, which is something that you guys actually want, of course we want it as well. Thank you, sirs. So we see this is very beneficial to kids in the sense that it's not about telling the kids what is right and what is the only right option and all other choices wrong. It's about how we let the kids themselves prioritize what they actually want to look for during their lives, and let them actually learn the idea of independence, learn the idea of how you should bear with your own consequences while reserving the rights of how you can actually make your own choices. No, thank you, sir. The second clash concerning the idea of how it actually also benefits the parents and the community as a whole. We talk about, especially from the closing house here, we talk about how this actually encourages parents to think again about what they are actually planning to do with the kids. Why is this the case? Because we recognize parents may have different priorities in different times in they have different priorities, they have different goals that they want to achieve in different time spans of their life. Which also means that we are offering them the policy that we do not impose the burden that the children is the absolute utmost priority on the parents. Because we recognize that the parent-child relationship is not the only exclusive thing that parents have to care about. That's why in this policy we actually allow the space for parents to prioritize other things, for example their career if they want to, so that while prioritizing their career, because we recognize the potential harm that may be dealt to the kids under the situation, we allow a way out for the kids to actually mitigate all this harm. So it actually means that when parents and kids have different priorities of life at the same point in time, our policy actually gives the best of the two worlds in the sense that we do not force them to deal with or unburden themselves with this conflict of priority. But we actually let them to handle this difference in priority on their own with different instruments out there. Therefore, we see it's actually a fundamental benefit. It's not only about kids, but also a fundamental benefit to parents and how they actually make the decisions in their life. So for both the kids and the parents' benefit as a whole, we are very proud to uphold.
Thank the government whip. I'd like to invite the last speaker to debate, the close debate now.
In my speech, I'm going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to do a comparison between parental right versus children right, and why under this particular instance we have to always prioritize parental right. Second, I'm also going to compare the role of the state and what makes a state and a parent different, and why the presence of parents is so important to help children to self-actualize, which they really want to. And third, I'm also going to analyze the benefits and the harm brought up by this policy. Before that, a few points of rebuttal. CG extension basically talk about how harm is a subjective. Harm is very subjective, so we have to let the children to decide. But they never explain to you why children's narrative has to play such an important role in determining how much right they should be entitled to. This is what they fail to explain to you. But second, both all opening houses, keep on telling you how under the status quo, children cannot self-actualize because they are living under the parental absolutism. But what they should have told you, but it's too late, is what kind of values or how state can better help you to self-actualize under the paradigm. This is what they didn't explain to you, and I am going to explain to you. No, sit down. Moving on to my clashes. First, parental right versus children right. OT talk about government can only infringe parents' right only if they cause harm. in my POI, I've already told you how it is not different from status quo because like legal protection has already prevents children from suffering from like parental abuses. So we don't think that is a problem. Second, CUHK talk about how harm is a subjective measure. But they never explain to you, like in my introduction, I've already told you how they didn't really explain to you why the degree of harm has to be the determinant factor that decide how much right that children should have. But what Patrick has told you in his speech, he has already told you that entitlement of right is based on a few bases. First, you're given certain right only if that right matter to your life or is very important to you, that matter to your survival. Second, you're only entitled your right only the state can make sure that you can exercise that right correctly. First, we don't think that right to actualize is very important to our children before the age of 18. We are not denying it. We are not denying your right to self-actualize after the age of 18. However, we think that at the age of as a children, your right is to ensure that you receive what the state should be provided to you is your right to access education. The state doesn't give a damn to what you want to be. We think that the right of the state has to be limited. But secondly, you can only receive right only if you can correctly exercise your right. We think that under the OG presumption, they talk about how you can always go back to your parents anyways. This enhance a very assumption that they recognize that children are changeable in nature. And in the status quo, there is a general perception that children are incapable actors and are vulnerable groups. Therefore, we have different law mechanisms to ensure and to protect the children because because we think that they are vulnerable and they are impulsive in nature, like what OO talked about, like their impulsive nature, how they are irrational to make certain decisions. And even though they make certain decisions, they keep changing anyways. Therefore, when we try to compare these two bases, we think that parents are firstly a better actor to exercise the right because they know, because they are adult, and we believe that their rational calculus has to be scrutinized by the state, because if you do something wrong, the state will take away your right to you. So we think that under this scenario, parents are better actor, and parents, if parents are not do bad to the children, their right will be taken away. Sit down. Sit down. And second clash. What is the role of the state and what makes a state different from a parent? We think that the relationship between you and the state is is a very contractual relationship, which means state provide you pay tax and state provide you basic necessity. However, parents and children relationship, the difference is that there is a biological linkage between parents and children, and parents also shape your moral foundation. We believe that state doesn't shape any moral value to you. And why this form of moral foundation is so important to children when they want to self-actualize? We think that state, to a certain extent, state might provide you some value, but then state can only provide value by law enforcement, and we think that that law enforcement is a very arbitrary concept that they simply tell you what you cannot do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the state tell you what you really want. And at the end, you only have to rely on yourself to find what you really want. But under our paradigm, like what Patrick told you, we think that the foundation, the moral foundation given by parents is very important. Why? No, sit down. We think that in order to self-actualization can only happen if you know what you really want, what you really don't want. We think that it is in nature, human beings don't really know what they want. Don't really know what they want. They will only know what they want only if they know what they really don't want. And why the presence of parents is so important? Because even if you deny the fact that you don't believe in what your parents believe, at least you have the roots, or you have the clue to know what you don't really want. And we think that this kind of relationship is important to children because
your self-actualization can only comes only if you know where you are and how you move from one stage to another. But under their case, they never explain to you why state is a better actor in forming or helping you to self-actualize. In Patrick's speech, we did a comparison to you why parents are better moral actor. But lastly, under our paradigm, we think that what is a harm? We told you that a harm that Patrick told you is children will seek an easy way out in solving conflicts with parents. And we think that this is particularly harmful. And I believe that Patrick has well explained to you. And that's why we think that this debate goes to closing opposition. Thank you.
Please, possible. Shake hands, please. Judges.